Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Adam Rocker. I work for OPSWAT on the product management team, and happy to have with me Amit Schulman from our solution engineering team. And today we're going to talk about some proven deployments for security for CI/CD pipelines, cloud storage, and file upload workflows. Um, Again, I'm on the product management team. I help with MetaDefender Core, work with customers, work with sales. Amit, you want to do a quick intro?
Sure, Adam. Thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Amit Schulman. I'm a director of solution engineering at OPSWAT. I've been with the company for 10 years now. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, awesome. All right, so just a real quick introduction. If you've not heard of OPSWAT, we'll talk about some of the technologies we have to help technology and other companies. But really, our goal is protecting the world's critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure isn't just oil and gas and power generation. It's anything that if we didn't have it tomorrow, the world would be different, right? So it's BFSI, it's technology companies, it's companies that create software to enable these other companies. And what our goal is to protect the file workflows that go through there. All right, so we're going to get into the agenda. We're going to talk about data and code. How do file workflows work in a technology company? Some of the common challenges and myths that people have around file security, and then we're going to jump into our multi-layered file protection strategy and what we can bring to an organization to help meet their security needs, and then go through some proven deployments, customers where we've helped fix some of their security problems with our solution. So this is a slide that you've probably seen. There's a lot of big numbers that try to set the stage of what is at stake in terms of threats to files and to companies that deal with a lot of files. Amit, I know that when we were talking here, the numbers here have kind of changed. There's still a lot of files, but some of the challenges that we're seeing lately are different for a technology company.
Right, and something you'll probably hear me say quite a few times today. Hackers are looking for the easiest way in. And it's pretty mind-blowing when we're talking to customers how often they kind of miss the obvious. One thing we talk about often is file upload protection. And you have a web application that might be internal, it might be external, but users are uploading files to your systems. And very, very often this is being overlooked.
Right.
Some of these numbers are talking about it, but when we're talking about data flow, a lot of it is just being under the assumption that, hey, if it's coming through email or if the file is already on my storage, it's probably safe.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not just the file. Where are the files coming in? The thing here for Shai Halud, 500 npm packages are infected, right? Malware, and those pipelines aren't necessarily being tracked when they come into the organization.
Right. And that's an interesting one because when it first came out, I think after a day, they said about close to 200 npm packages were affected.
Yeah.
But it's a self-replicating worm. So very
Right.
quickly, those numbers jumped up,
Right.
which also tells us, even if we scan something, we have a workflow already to scan the files and make sure it's safe before it's hitting our storage or kicking off the next business process with the files. Those results can change, right? What we think
Right.
is safe today might come back with a different result tomorrow.
And you have to worry about the supply chain too, right? Like depending on which package you're using, there's so many different open source packages out there that could be impacted. It's a lot of risk if you're trying to move fast and be innovative.
Yeah, especially we're saying technology companies, I would say technology units, because you have a
Yeah.
lot of companies that might not necessarily technology focused, but they still have lots of different development teams and so on, and somehow needs to get that under control.
Right. So, one thing to help kind of illustrate all the different places, across an enterprise where you've got files coming in, whether it's external files, patches, application updates. You have your own software packages. You have, things on GitHub. You have things in Jenkins. You have internal users sending files everywhere, right? So it's not like you can just check one box and then feel that you're good. There's all the different attack vectors that files can use to make their way into an organization and spread.
Right. Now, this might be familiar to some of our listeners, but what I'm seeing when I'm looking at this is complicated infrastructure, probably some hybrid on-premise and cloud-hosted AWS and Google Cloud and so on. But if you think of it from the customer side, I mean, everything you see here might require a different solution, a different vendor, a different way of deploying that solution. It's really hard to take all these data sources and have everything flow through a single solution that can really tackle everything we're trying to do here.
Right. Then you've got disjointed results and you have to match them up between different vendors. And then it's a he said, she said of who is actually responsible for, getting it fixed.
Exactly.
So you mentioned, some of the challenges. I know, the integration complexity is something that, affects whether it's a technology company, any company that has a technology department. How do you make all of the applications work together and actually have a sum that's better than the total of the parts, right? How do you get that security outcome when you have vendors A through Z that are within the environment? What other? I think you mentioned malware, right? The blind spot of not being able to fully trust all the files that are moving into the network.
Right. So first of all, the obvious challenge is that we want to prevent malware from coming in. Known malware, unknown malware, new sophisticated evasion techniques, whatever it is, the hackers market constantly evolves, right? Not only there's one perfect solution out there that can catch everything, all the known threats. Think about things like scaling. We're talking about deploying that as an enterprise solution for large enterprises. And when we talk about malware scanning, almost everyone I talk to immediately like, oh yeah, we have an antivirus installed on our endpoints, whatever that may be. And that's great, but really that's your last line of defense.
That's the last line of defense, right?
Absolutely.
You have to wait for it to, get in there, potentially replicate before you're able to detect it.
Right. And do you want to test that? And it's been tested before. And again, that might catch the attack, it might not. But the real kind of zero trust approach here is, why should we even test that? Let's catch that at the gateway. Let's look at the file, see if we know if it's good or bad. Let's take away anything that could potentially be exploited in that file. And let's give customers an easy way to use that. So if you look at your installed antivirus, if you want to scan files in a programmatic way, think about your web application, a file is being uploaded and you want to integrate through REST API or whatever that may be. There's not a lot of good, easy ways to do that right now. So having a gateway that's not just dedicated to scan files for malware in a very advanced way, but also the way you do that, the way you deploy that and integrate into the environment is critical to customers.
Right. Because you don't want to disrupt, right? I mean, they still have to take the files from point A to point B, get work done, and not have it take a long time or several steps along the way.
The disrupt is the key word here, right?
Yeah.
I recently did a POC with a customer. Before we even started talking about what it takes to set up a POC, they started by saying, we're difficult. we're going to be difficult, right? And they know every little thing you ask them, something that maybe you and I can simply do on our lab or something like that,
Right.
might require approval from 5 different teams, and each team will have their concern, and you need to make everyone happy.
Yeah.
That's a big challenge to take, and having the customer testing the product, knowing that ahead of time, already kind of tells you what you're going to deal with.
Right.
Being flexible enough to fill into an environment, to fit into an environment like that, it's not easy. But if you can be agnostic to the network, if you can be agnostic to the deployment, the infrastructure itself, or to the integration points, then you can start making some of these teams happy, right?
Right. Right. No disruption. That's pretty much the key.
Right.
So some myths when people start looking at a security solution or a security situation, right? The myths that kind of might send people down the wrong track. The first one is like what you mentioned. I've got an AV on my desktop, and they advertise 100% detection rate. Right. I see those advertisements, and the thing is, there's a lot of great engines out there, but all it takes is one bad day, right? And one slow day, right? Not even a bad day, but a slow day where a a piece of malware that might be targeted to your organization hasn't been seen by any AVs yet,
Right.
right? And that's where we can talk about CDR and stuff like that too. But the really the point is a single engine only gives you as much as that single engine can provide, right? And that's the visibility of the company creating the definition.
Exactly. And if you think about it this way, when we're talking about AV engine, the one we have installed on our laptops and so on, they're doing a lot more than just looking at a file and decided if it's good or bad, right?
Right.
They're monitoring the behavior on the system. They're trying to see if you're maybe doing something you shouldn't be doing and things like that. When it comes down to give me a file and tell me is this good or bad, that starts to change. Now, even there, we're talking about relying heavily on online resources. So we
Right.
might have databases online, reach out to and check, hey, did you see this file? Do you know that?
Right.
I said many.
Reputation check online is part of what gives you that 100%, but it requires that you're online at the
Right,
time.
right. And like I said, many of our customers are a little bit paranoid. They don't like reaching out when they don't have to the internet and so on. So when you take away that capability, we're probably talking about detection rates of average around 50%, say
Yeah.
40 to 60%. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying it's never about shaming one AV vendor. There's always I've always hear discussions. It's like some of them are better, some are less. We're not in that business.
No.
At the end of the day, none of them
All
are
of them.
yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good. So yeah, it's just there's no one AV that can catch everything. It just doesn't exist.
Right.
I will make the same assumption on AI. The thing that makes these solutions kind of lacking when it comes to malware detection or prevention is that they rely on what they know.
Right.
Right? An AV is looking up signatures, is looking up heuristic analysis. Maybe there's certain binary patterns in the file that are familiar to us. AI is no magic. AI still relies on things that already happened, that we already know.
Right.
Hackers,
It can help you create an exploit maybe faster, but it's still using an exploit that can be patched, and creating malware that still we can detect if we have seen it. But it's six of one, half dozen of the other. They have a whole attackers have a whole new toolkit, uh, to make their attacks better, and it's kind of up to us to come up with the other side of that equation.
yeah, and take into account, I mean, hot topic today, AI itself could be vulnerable
Right.
beyond just relying on detection.
Yeah.
But detection will never get you to 100%.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The one other thing I want to point out here is, in the cloud, right? We've talked about this in other webinars. It still bears mentioning that, once, a lot of companies, especially in the technology sector, have adopted that migration to the cloud. And the thing is, the cloud offers a whole bunch of cool stuff, right? A whole lot of simplicity and functionality, streamlining the way that you can manage a large environment. The thing is, they provide security, but they don't necessarily, it still requires that you enable the security, right? And they're handling the security of the network that's hosting your network, but they're not securing your network. And that's one of the things that I think catches some people off guard, is assuming that AWS or Azure or GCP is going to handle everything at the perimeter, but that's just not the case.
Yeah, and that's a common assumption across the board, right? I've seen the same thing with emails. They're saying, "Hey, I have an email gateway. If an email made it through, it must be good."
Yeah,
And even though there's some checks that are happening on the gateway, again, it's not perfect. You can just make the assumption that we checked it and now it's good to go.
right. All right. So we talked about the blind spots and, the potential, the challenges, and, what slows people down. Now let's kind of pivot to how we can help, right? Where does Metadefender fit in? This is a really busy slide, so I'm not going to, make everyone try to look at it in too much detail, because we'll get that in the other slides. But essentially, OPSWAT offers a full-scale multi-layered file protection solution, where no matter where the files are moving, right, whether they might be at rest, they might still be in transit, coming in through the perimeter, through partners, or through your customers. And what we're able to do through a stack of different technologies is look at the files with multiple AV engines. We have a sandbox, we have CDR, which does sanitization. But basically, when we talk about multi-layered, it really is several different, in-depth analysis that we can apply to these files to ensure that, number one, that they're safe to use in your environment, and number two, we can even, sanitize the files to, close off those unknown threats that may not have been seen by anyone. I mean, anything you want to talk about on this slide before we get into the meat of it?
Sure. This is what we call the platform approach, right? Going back to what we talked about, the focus of the Metadefender platform here is, give me a file, I'll let you know what I think about that file, which might mean different things to different customers, right? We said good, bad files. It's not one magic answer for everyone. That can be depending on compliance requirements, depending on maybe the vertical you're in, things like that.
Right.
But the idea here was to create a platform that's really focusing on the file. Is it malicious? Does it have sensitive data? Everything we can tell you about that file, including some technology powered by patents, like the vulnerability assessment, which is a very unique way to look at a file and tell you, hey, here's a list of known vulnerabilities for that file. And with that, customer can take that to anywhere where data flows in the organization, not just files coming from external sources. Might be files going from the business network to a more secure network, to a PCI compliant network, and things like that.
Right.
That's where a lot of that flexibility comes, is now we're saying, hey, we have all these capabilities to scan a file. Let me give you an easy way to just tap into what you're doing today, right? You mentioned no distractions.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Meeting customers where their data is, right? We don't expect anyone to have to, create a new architecture to support it. We want to be there to support with minimal disruption, and give you that security outcome. So let's talk about some customers. We're going to go through some customer stories that we have on our website, and just kind of hit some highlights of the problems that they had, and talk about how they might be useful for you guys watching. might help solve some of the same issues. So HiBob, they make HR software. HR software, think about it, right? You've got job sites that are taking in all of the different applications, right? You have all the different files that employees need to do for onboarding, and essentially, how do you ensure that all these files from all of these unknown people are safe?
Right. So HiBob, like you mentioned, had a platform for human resource management, onboarding, offboarding, performance reviews, and so on. We can argue about bad internal actors, which happens, right? Maybe you have a company employee, but realistically, let's talk about the more common ones, which is hackers trying to infiltrate your network. HiBob released a new feature for hiring, which means you're going to get a whole bunch of files from people you don't know.
Right.
They have over 4,000 customers, which means for HiBob, each customer could be thousands of files every day. That adds up pretty quickly.
Right.
So two big issues to solve. We have files that are coming in from untrusted, unknown sources, files that very often used as an attack vector like PDF and Microsoft Office files, which might hide,
Embedded,
you know,
an embedded script, or something that shouldn't be in a PDF.
yeah, active content, right? Anything that can actually execute something on the system, from macros to JavaScripts and things like that. The other issue they had here is they're saying, hey, we're 100% cloud-based company. All of their infrastructure is hosted on one of the major cloud providers. They're saying, we don't want to start changing what we're doing. We have an application, it's working great. We just want something that can tap into what we're doing, grab those tens or 100,000 files a day, scan them really quickly, right? Think about file upload. When you go and you upload a file to your, I don't know, insurance, taxes, things like that, and you get back that message, okay, the file was uploaded, everything looks good. What happens if that takes more than 2 seconds?
Right.
You click through, you start refreshing, something is wrong, right?
Right. Something's wrong.
So the expectation is that scanning the files with multiple scan engines, going through deep CDR, which we'll explain a little bit more later what that means, but going through all that stack that we showed for Meta Defender within milliseconds.
Right.
And then scale that to
multiple files per second at that rate.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can control that either. It's not like they can tell you, oh, once an hour we get a file. Like, they might have 1,000 files uploaded pretty much at the same time, and it might be more spread during the day, but they have no control over that. So they need to scale that to fairly high performance.
Right. So I think it covered the stuff on here. Essentially it boils down to, there's a lot of companies that bring in a lot of files that many times come from somewhere else, right? They come from an external user. Is that a blind spot that our listeners have? Is it something that you need to secure? Yeah, if it's coming in from external, even from a partner, do they have the same focus on security that you do when those files get intermixed?
Right.
So,
and I think,
go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think the focus there for HiBob was really CDR to eliminate the unknown threats and not take any chances there, but also integration with our core infrastructure. So two keys for success in that project.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, the next one we'll talk about is North Grid. They make software for local government, and I know that's been in the news lately. Is water supply, energy supply for local municipalities, and malware attacking those type of companies, right? I mean, they're having to run a business just like most. Any thoughts on this one, as far as how we can help there?
Yeah, I thought that's an interesting example, because a lot of times we're talking to large companies if you ask me who's the ideal customer for OPSWAT, I'll say someone that has 5,000 employees plus, because they tend to have more mature cybersecurity programs and they have the need for more advanced tools.
Yeah.
Well, here you have a company that is, at least at the time they started using OPSWAT, were about 27 employees. However, they're serving large customers and they're serving local government. Local government have their requirements, of course, and one of the things that happened here is North Grid got hit with the Amit malware. So obviously, big concern both to them and to their customers. They don't want to distribute malware as part of their software and service they provide to their customers.
Right.
So the requirement here really came from the local government, that's saying, hey, you need a way to prevent that, not just detect that, right? And the difference when I'm saying prevent and detect is, we scan the file with an AV engine because, of course, we want to know if someone is targeting us, if someone's trying to upload something bad to our systems. Reality is, again, no perfect solution. You can't always expect to detect everything. CDR was their way to disarm that, right? The emotet very, very commonly is being distributed through macro-enabled files, again, Microsoft Office, PDF files. And it's a downloader or dropper type of malware. So it will actually try to, let's say, drop a document on your system that will run a macro that might reach out to a link to download the next payload. So very, very common in productivity files, let's call that. And a way to prevent that by requirement from the government, again, pretty challenging task.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, the seamless integration, being able to fit into where the customer's file workflow is, right? Being able to, again, not have to have them create a whole new architecture to support this, but to support the security outcome right there in their environment was I think, key. Fast Track software. So they're a customer for Metadefender Cloud, right? What we're talking about in terms of the platform, most all of it we have in the cloud as well as part of our SaaS. All the primary functionality you can get with a SaaS as well. And tell us about Fast Track, Amit.
So Fast Track is essentially an system administrator on demand, right? And
admin by request, I think, is the name of the tool. Yeah,
you got it. And obviously, with the capabilities of an admin, you get access to do a lot of things on the system that might be critical, especially coming from a hosted service, right? Main thing here was giving them the access to install software on the company's laptops. And of course, again, they don't want to be the culprit of a breach and install something that wasn't fully vetted properly through the process, not just the single AV engine. So they had a cool integration with Metadefender Cloud, which is a hosted version of the platform we showed earlier, Metadefender. Any installer that needs to go in the system will automatically go through Metadefender Cloud, check that signature, make sure that file is not malicious by 30 plus different AV engines. Again, maybe no perfect, but this comes pretty close to perfect as far as detection.
Right. And being able to do it on the fly without having to run it on a machine, right? Being able to do it at the gateway before it gets to the endpoint.
Yeah, seamless for the user. They don't know what's happening. They had a workflow. The story is on our website, and there's a good diagram kind of showing the workflow before, how the whole process went from request to installing a software, what's the chain of command and chain of approval there, all the way to installation, and how OPSWAT fits in that process. We see that often, right? So we talked a little bit about open source and things like that, but the first problem here is obviously we don't want to get infected ourselves. We don't want proprietary information being exfiltrated. We don't want to damage the reputation of the company. By the way, recently on the Ponemon report research, they said first thing that will get hit is productivity. Both employee and company productivity, more than anything, will probably have a big impact on the company that got breached there. The second thing is you don't want to distribute that malware. So of course, I don't want to get hit, but I also don't want to get all of my customers infected as well. I've even seen a case where a large financial company that has their own software, and that's why I mentioned let's talk technology units, right? This is a financial company, money is their business.
Right.
Multiple development teams, multiple applications, and they actually have a software they distribute to their customers to install on their laptops. Talking about operation, disruption to operation, their problem was once in a while, an AV engine will detect their software as malicious. For them, part of a smooth deployment and release process was to make sure their own software is not being detected as malicious.
Yeah, that's a key thing. Like there's nothing that erodes customer confidence more than when they upgrade to something and then everything either breaks or you have an outbreak, right? That's the worst Friday for an admin.
Yeah. And even if it's not really malicious, can you imagine the amount of questions that will come up from that? Hey, why is my antivirus detects your installer as a threat, right?
Right. And it goes to the brand trust. You know, how much can customers or your partners trust you to deliver what you're supposed to, and not anything else, not any malware that's tagging along for the ride.
Yeah, without naming names, before Shai Hulud, if I would say supply chain attack, I think everyone would have the same name in their mind. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so we talked about the deployments, the customer cases. We're gonna round it out with some of the technologies that we've alluded to. You know, there's a couple that we're going to dig down into real quick. SBOM, which is our secure bill of materials module, and then two other products that we think are very relevant for, again, you know, the technology department of whatever type of business that you're in. Metadefender storage security, you know, will help you scan your storage, your data at rest, and Metadefender software supply chain helps secure those CI/CD pipelines, and you know, help protect you from those open source packages that might be infected that you're downloading during development. So storage security, you know, pretty straightforward as far as the value that it can give. Tell us about, you know, some of the common uses that customers make with this software.
So we talked about Metadefender as the main platform to scan the files. Now we're talking about integrations and way to deploy that. So each integration point, let's call that, kind of adds unique functionality for that integration. And when we're talking about storage security, first thing that comes to my mind is broad integration, is the hybrid environments, because this is a platform where we don't necessarily focus on a single unit. We're saying if you get storage security, you can now tap into your S3 buckets, to your on-prem SMBs, to your NetApp storage, to your Azure, whatever storage you're using today, all the way to SharePoint and OneDrive, right? If it's hosted by you or someone else, right. Take all of that, plug and play our platform to what you're doing today. But that also gives them additional functionality like automated remediation. So now I have a complete out-of-the-box process to pick up files, maybe from an SMB share on-prem, scan that with the platform, whatever that means for our customers, if it's a CDR and DLP or just the AV scans. But based on the results, now I can take action and say, hey, if this file was sanitized, copy that to maybe an S3 bucket. If it has certain tags on it, maybe I want it on a different network and a different storage unit. So there's a lot of that functionality that's been added to security. It's not just the security, right. It's the operation, right?
Right.
The other thing, once you tap into all these storage units, you get that dashboard with the compliance reports, and you get kind of a good overview of all of your stored files.
Yeah. Basically, look, and I know it's an overused phrase, but a single pane of glass for all of the storage. And that's useful, right? Because like you said, there's very few companies that just have their files on-prem, right? And then even fewer that just have it on-prem and just one cloud service, right? Depending on what partners they may have, you need to be able to look at all of that data, because no matter where it's stored, it's still yours. It's still your responsibility, and it'll still impact you if you don't make sure that it's clean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A little bit maybe on the previous slide, couple of things we can add here in the technology, but
Yeah.
we keep saying no AV is perfect. Multi-scanning, beyond the idea of taking multiple scan engines to have better chances to detect threats. The thing that's less obvious here is faster detection of outbreaks. Normally, outbreaks are being detected by the AV vendor that's closer to the outbreak geographically.
Right.
So if there is an outbreak in Romania today, Bitdefender, that's an AV vendor based in Romania, they will pick it up before any other AV vendor.
Yeah.
And the time to detect that outbreak will change between one vendor to another. It could be hours, days, weeks, sometimes. So it's just wider coverage of geographical locations and much, much faster detection of outbreaks.
Yeah. The way that I typically put it is, combining the multiple vendors that are, geographically specialized, based on where they are, you get regional specialty combined into global visibility, right?
Right.
It really is a great tool to lower the mean time to detect. And, all right.
And then two sentences on CDR, because I know we
Sure.
keep bringing it up, but I don't think
Yeah.
I actually explained what that means. So we said detection is not perfect. Prevention will get you close to perfect, because what happens with CDR, we talked about, let's say, a PDF that has a JavaScript in it.
Right.
Multi-scanning AV engines, they're trying to analyze that script and tells you if it's good or bad. CDR comes and says, hey, this can be used for an attack. Let's just get rid of it. I don't care what it's doing. So it will give you a new version of that PDF file without the JavaScript or any other component that could potentially be used in an attack.
And in the vast majority of cases, unless you're renaming the file after processing, there's no functional difference to the end user, right? It's pretty much invisible. We're cleaning out the stuff that could potentially be bad that's embedded, but all of your data, right? All the things that make the file worth something are still going to be there.
A PDF is still PDF by the RFC. Yeah.
Right. All right. So supply chain, we talked about as well. The ability to really secure that CI/CD pipeline. I know one of the old stories is a car manufacturer that's putting software into their HUD in a new vehicle, and how expensive it was when that software was infected by malware, and they needed to recall thousands and thousands of vehicles because they didn't have any view, right? They were creating software, they weren't scanning it, and they shipped it with malware.
How quickly that can escalate, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. This goes back to where I said good or bad files might mean different things to different companies or different teams within the company. When we're talking about developing code, obviously we don't want to touch anything that could potentially be malicious. That's always top of the list, right? And we're talking about open source packages, third-party libraries. There's a whole bunch of components that we didn't necessarily develop from the ground up, and we don't really know what's in there. But the other thing could be things like hard-coded passwords, API keys, anything that could get us in trouble later. And unfortunately, we've seen that in the past couple of years, that was the culprit of the attack, is someone just forgot their admin, their username and password in the code, and that was, eventually found and exploited.
Yeah, from including it in there to make testing easier, to basically giving away the keys to the kingdom once they shipped it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then again, complicated environments. It's not that straightforward today. You have multiple resources where you might be pulling these libraries and open source code from, and then your development infrastructure, is probably a little bit more robust today than it was 20 years ago. So
Right.
just another thing to take in mind is, again, not just solving the problem, but how do we fit into such a complicated environment?
Right. So great segue into integrations. You have to be able to reach the data in order to analyze it. We do have integrations across most all of the popular development platforms, and support for a lot of different languages. We don't have that slide in here, but if you're doing modern development, with a modern development language, that's something that we do support.
Right.
All right, we'll close this out with our SBOM module. So this is available through MetaDefender Core, and essentially, gives you the ability to create a secure bill of materials that you can ship with, to your partners, to regulators, to anyone that needs to see that your software has been built securely and needs to see a report on it. Anything on this that you'd like to add, Amit, from customer experience?
A lot of times when we're talking about protecting network, we'll say you can protect what you don't know that's there. I always saw that as kind of the equivalent to code development, right? You probably have multiple teams that are collaborating on certain application. We talked about scanning, the different components before you build and release that application. And SBOM is just a really easy way to get a list of all of these components, what libraries and open source code we have in our application. That will come already with vulnerability information, like I mentioned. And you might not necessarily be distributing malware, but you might have
Right.
components that have vulnerabilities that do expose your customers. Give you a good idea what to do to either mitigate that, or at least give heads up to your customers and say, hey, here's a known issue, this is how you solve it.
And like we saw on one of the first slides, 99% of companies use some sort of open source.
Absolutely.
Right? It was stuff that they don't have direct control over, and they don't necessarily have the visibility if they're not actively looking to ensure. And that's what the SBOM module helps with, is automate that process so you have that confidence to be able to ship.
That goes back again to the assumption that, oh, if we have that, that's probably okay.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, we mentioned the languages. This is just a quick view of what, the type of output that SBOM can produce. But essentially, from the perspective of, whether the data is in storage, whether it's moving through your CI/CD pipeline, whether it's coming in from external, we have a solution that can fit seamlessly into that environment. All right, so we're getting down to the end. This is just a quick plug for OPSWAT. We do understand, we try to understand what our customers are going through. We've been through a lot of the same certification processes that you guys have, and we really want to help make that easy, right? None of the audits that you go through are simple. We do try to focus on what are the things that simplify your workflows to actually get work done, right? We want to simplify the security part and help with the compliance reporting, so that you can actually demonstrate that you're not just compliant, but that you're secure, not just checking a box, but delivering a really high quality security outcome from the scans. And we're purpose built. The great thing, when I joined the company, one of the things that was immediately apparent is we're trying to fix problems that not a whole lot of people are necessarily aware of, right? It's stuff that sometimes gets overlooked. We talked about blind spots, and we have a purpose-built solution that can work in your critical infrastructure environment. Whether it's power and gas, whether it's creating software or supporting other companies or citizens. We have something that can help take care of that security gap and ensure that files moving into your network are safe to use. All right. That brings us to a close. Amit, any other closing thoughts?
Not for me, Adam. Thanks for having me. That was fun.
All right, great. Thank you guys. Again, if you have questions, put them in the chat and someone will respond back. We do thank you for your time. Hope you have a great day.